So let's dive into today's chapter, which is Jon II of A Storm of Swords. So Jon is observing Mance's host, taking notes of all the giants and mammoths that make up the army. Tormund is telling Jon some tales about himself when an eagle that was once Orl's rakes Jon's face. Rattleshirt has arrived to bring Jon before Mance, this time at the Fist of the First Men. The king confronts Jon about how many men were at the Fist and who led. Jon, seeing how many of the watch died here and realizing Mance may kill him for lying, tells him the truth. The situation is still tense. Jon feels that Mance may still have him killed because Jon lied to him previously. Briefly, he thinks about attacking Mance, but Ygritte saves him by telling him they're lovers. The wildling respects any man who steals his woman, and Raider informs Jon that he will be leaving with Styr and Jarl on the morrow to climb the wall. That night, Jon and Ygritte share a bed together.
Giggity. Yeah, this chapter has a lot of good stuff, and at the center of it all is Jon Snow's many allegiances and many duties and many ties to different groups of people. And I was talking to someone today who is a pretty in-depth reader of the series, and they were just talking about how their more general friends who don't read a lot and definitely don't read a lot of fantasy, whenever they read these books, even before the TV show back in the day, hated Jon Snow. And they hated Jon because he didn't keep his oaths, and they felt like he kind of betrayed the Night's Watch and his house of House Stark. And I just thought that was really interesting because Matt, am I right when saying that we both love Jon Snow? Right?
Oh, Jon's my favorite character.
He is, to me. Jon is one of my favorite
in both the show and the books.
Yes, I think Jon is fantastic, and it's just surprising to me. I do see like more of the general population, and for the books, specifically the books, we're leaving the show out of this, don't like Jon. They think he's an entitled brat, kind of, and they think that he's a little too wishy-washy, and he's always kind of mopey and complain, which he is a little bit brooding for sure. But I guess I've never really seen him in a negative light before. It boggles my mind that people hate Jon Snow.
Yeah, I think what caused me to like him initially was when I first started watching Game of Thrones, because I watched before I dove into the books, and you've got stuff going on in Winterfell, you got stuff going on in King's Landing, Daenerys is over here. But the thing that I found the most interesting, and I think it's just because, again, that prologue is the opening scene in Game of Thrones with the White Walkers is so interesting. I was like, well, this is the guy that's dealing with that. That's like way more. And then, Ned Stark saying winter is coming. It's like, yeah, none of this other stuff matters.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that was the character that I found most interesting. And then what's the deal with his mom? So that's, to me, why Jon immediately was like my favorite character, because he was the one I was the most in. His storyline was the one I was most interested in.
Yeah, and he's the closest to the war gang, and a lot of, we have giants in this chapter. And by the way, just the scene setting of the mammoths and the giant riders and how many there were, there must be hundreds, Jon thinks. And I'm just like, holy cow. These things are not common. Like, they're not common in Westeros, certainly not common in our world. So like seeing that through Jon's eyes, to me, is like some of my favorite parts of the series when it comes to just like the fantastical. But also, I've always just found the dynamics between him and all the characters north very interesting. From, Jorah Mormont to Mance Rayder to Tormund to pick any of the Night's Watch guys, Sam, Small Paul, it doesn't matter who it is, up there at the wall. I've always just found it really interesting. And then in Dance with Dragons, I think it gets leveled up whenever you get Stannis up there and Melisandre. It's like, holy crap, Jon is pulled in so many different ways. I can't help but to be enthralled in his story. So it just, and I know everyone has an opinion, and there's plenty of characters to choose from this series to latch on to. But for me, Jon has always been at the top of the list, or near the top, I should say.
Yeah. And then it also helps that he, as the series progressed, sort of becomes the main character.
He is the ice and fire. Yes, for sure. Yeah. And also in Dance of Dragons, there's a obvious dynamic going on. I shouldn't say dynamic, but a comparison between Dany and Jon and the situations that they're put in. Like, they're very, very good. They're good, have good intentions, but the worst things come from that. And it's also like the price of doing those things, right? Like bringing refugees of wildlings beneath the wall, but also Daenerys trying to free the slaves and the follow of that. I mean, a lot of people end their fantasy story with that happening. Everyone says, yay, you know, and that's kind of it. So I think George actually doesn't get enough credit for how nuanced he has for people who are taking responsibility and trying to do the right things.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. Let's dive in here a little bit. I always like to read just some of the opening here. So, big enough for you, snowflakes speckled Tormund's broad face, melting in his hair and beard. The giants swayed slowly atop the mammoths as they rode past two by two. Jon's Garen Jon's Garen shield, frightened by such strangeness. But whether it was the mammoths or their riders that scared him, it was hard to say. Even Ghost backed off a step, baring his teeth in a silent snarl. The dire wolf was big, but the mammoths were a deal bigger, and there were many and more of them. Jon took the horse in hand and held him still so he could count the giants emerging from the blowing snow and pale mist that swirled along the milkwater. He was well beyond 50 when Tormund said something and he lost the count. There must be hundreds. No matter how many went past, they just seemed to keep coming. In old Nan's stories, giants were outsized men who lived in colossal castles, fought with huge swords, and walked about in boots a boy could hide in. These were something else, more bear-like than human. As woolly as the mammoths they rode, seated, it was hard to say how big they truly were. 10 feet tall, maybe, or 12, Jon thought. Maybe 14, but no taller. Their sloping chests might have passed for those of men, but their arms hung down too far, and their lower torsos looked half again as wide as their upper. Their legs were shorter than their arms, but very thick, and they wore no boots at all. Their feet were broad, splayed things, hard and horny and black. Necklace, their huge, heavy heads thrust forward from between their shoulder blades, and their faces were squashed and brutal. Rats' eyes, no larger than beads, were almost lost within folds of horny flesh, but they snuffled constantly, smelling as much as they saw. Yeah, they're not wearing skins, Jon realized that's hair.
Yeah, shaggy pelts covered their bodies thick below the waist, sparser above. The stink that came off of them was choking, but perhaps that was the mammoths. And Joramun blew the horn of winter and woke giants from the earth. That is a line that I underlined 3 times. Also, would you say it's Yoramun or Joramun? I would say Joramun.
I think Roy Detree says Jormon, and I feel like
he
that's
don't
what
count. He gets all
right. I know. Yeah, I do feel like that is what most of the fandom has decided it is called.
Okay, so this is massive, right? And Joramun blew the horn of winter and woke giants from the earth. The song never says if the horn can put them back to sleep. So this is that horn of winter coming up, which we've speculated a lot about. And you know, the more I think about this stuff, the more I think that the Horn of Winter is going to be something that we just totally don't expect. And I know me and you have talked about what if they got switched and the wall comes down? What if the horn is the key to beating the White Walkers? Remember how we were talking, it has to be a key to shut them off? And we bounce back and forth, whether it be a figurehead or like whatever it might be. But like, what if the Horn of Winter is one of those things that could do this? And people think it's going to bring down the wall or something else, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe dragon binding horns don't do what we think they do. So I love that this gets brought up here, and it also brings up a were the giants naturally here the whole time? Did they evolve in Westeros? Because we hear a little bit about them in the World of Ice and Fire, but largely their tribes and culture is kind of unexplored. And Jon is getting a fresh look just as we are as the reader, because we hadn't really seen them before this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also got to remember, this is, we think about this, like, while giants may not necessarily be magical, right? It is still something that we're seeing beyond the wall that you would no otherwise see.
Yes.
On the other side of the wall. And that's actually kind of a theme in this chapter, and something I kind of picked up on was like just how different it is, how different the wildlings are. Because I got a map, and I'm gonna pull it up here, because I think sometimes we think about like the wildlings almost like prisoners or something, like because it's like they
Yeah.
live on that side of the wall, and it's like this southern point of view is the way we view them, but the north is like what they call the north as opposed to like the south, you
Mhm.
southerners below your wall. It's pretty big,
Oh, it's massive.
and like a lot of these people go and they live their lives, and they would have no idea what's going on in King's Landing. Some of them
It's
might not even know it exists,
it's like
right? I
living in
mean,
Mobile, Alabama.
I don't,
You don't know what's
I don't
going
know
on
about
there?
that.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. To all of our faithful Mobile, Alabama listeners, I'm just joking.
Yeah, so here's a map, and this is one of my favorite maps of the wildling territory.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look up here in the I got my cursor up here. I mean, look how big that is. Just this little section here is almost just as big as, like the north itself. And the
I
north
mean, it's
is
multiple times bigger than Dorne.
multiple times bigger than Dorne. I mean, it's almost as big as like, here's like here's like the Stormlands into the Crown Lands, then the Reach and Dorne. I mean, that's almost just as big as that section. So I mean, it's just a little under a third of all of Westeros if you include the north as part of it. Now we don't know how much further it extends going up, but I mean it's pretty big, really.
Yeah, and Uncharted being the key word on this map on Lands of Always Winter, and we just talked about the Heart of Winter. This is something, George, I have to imagine is going to go into in the final two books for sure.
Yeah, we could end up going. And then so over here you've got the giant stairs, which goes right down into the Fist of the First Men. So this is over here where maybe the giants, live more like that. I mean, look how much further away the Thens are. Right, we see them like in the show, right? They're like the cannibals, and Jon's going to be dealing with them here shortly. But even they live like way far away from, say, Hardhome, or like down here, like Crasher's Keep and stuff like that. So I think sometimes we forget it. And that's some of that stuff comes up when they talk about the wildling culture. And it's one of the things I actually kind of forgot about as to maybe one of the reasons why Ygritte actually likes Jon as much. And Tormund brings it up at the end of this chapter where he's like, actually, by our customs, he's like Ygritte might just like you because she likes you, but kind of by our customs, you've actually already like taken Ygritte. It's like you kind of took her captive, which by our customs means like, no, she's like your wife now. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
he's
that's kind of like
the customs and like, it's messy.
Right. So I actually kind of like forgot about that for a second, where we sort of just think like, well, Jon, she kind of takes Jon captive after he takes her captive. But by their customs, I mean, they steal their women, which for better, right, or obviously worse. But in like Jon and Ygritte's case, it kind of works out, I guess. But by their customs, that's kind of the way it is. So it's kind of, this chapter actually does even dive a little bit further into just like how the wildlings actually live.
Yeah, for sure. And I always thought it was interesting that the Thens are so far north, like they're so far north, near the Lands of Always Winter. And like, are they a subset off of the others? You know what I mean?
I don't
Like,
know.
assuming, and again, I'm going with our theory that they're a total different species almost, right? And that they have their own culture. And yes, they are turning the dead into the living again, but like at the core of them, there's something there that has already existed. And like the Fens are cannibalistic. So the White Walkers, like, are they possibly like some sort of weird, like human other hybrid?
Well, we don't really know if the White Walkers are cannibalistic or not.
I'm assuming. I am definitely assuming that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because remember, for those of you who are going, hold on, what a second. The book White Walkers, I just try to bring this back up anytime. The White Walkers in the books are kind of different than the White Walkers in the show. Like in the show, it's just ice zombies and like one mega ice zombie and then a few little, like the other ones, the other White Walkers. But in the books, they seem different. They seem more intelligent. We don't know nearly as much about them.
George will definitely add nuance to that, just like there's nuance to pretty much everything that he puts into these books for the most part.
In the books, the Children of the Forest might not even have created them like they did in the show.
That's right. That could be a totally Dan and Dave thing. Just like
we don't know that. We don't know that. And but it could be because I remember we did a dive back into a World of Ice and Fire, like a couple. Well, it was a while
It's
ago,
been
but
months now.
it's been months now. But we did it before we dove back into the reread because we're like we want to just kind of do a quick refresher here before we did this. And if you look at the language that they talk about, it's hard to tell exactly when the White Walkers showed up.
Yes, the timeline is extremely vague, and I imagine that was probably on purpose because George might be still figuring out some of the answers that to the questions that we're asking. But I just have that strong urge, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again: is that a lot of the inspiration that George took for A Song of Ice and Fire from many different things, but one of the major ones was Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, which is an epic fantasy trilogy. And the Scythe are very similar to White Walkers. And the Scythe were also kind of looked at as like a monstrous, creatures or, group of people. But turns out that there was a lot more nuance to them than it seemed at first light. So I kind of expect George to at least dabble in some sort of nuance and culture for them. But we could be totally wrong. Maybe they are just mindless zombies just roaming down with no real motivations. But I don't know. I don't think.
Yeah, I love how Jon also sort of in this chapter, and we'll get to it here in a bit. But when he's talking to Tormund a little bit, and he's like, well, he's kind of shocked by the fact that he's now seen giants, and then he also talks about like grumpkins and snarks, right? Which they said, and he's like, I don't know, maybe Tormund will eat one here in a second. It could be. This is all new to him.
I think that's pretty much the next scene, right?
Yeah, so there's still a little bit with the giants where he's asking Tormund, he's like, was that their king? He said giants have no kings, no more than mammoths do. He's like, you could kneel to him if you want. I know how you Southerners are. He's like, don't, just be careful. He doesn't step on you. And you can also see Tormund's immediately kind of taking interest in Jon and liking Jon.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And Tormund just seems to not take much serious as is. Like, he's obviously a dangerous dude, but it's the best of the dangerous guys where it's like, if you don't give me a reason to chop off your hands, I'm not going to do it, but I can if I want.
Yeah. And Tormund gives his stories right here where he talks about like how he cut open a giant and slept in her stomach, and then the giant didn't die, and then she thought he was his baby. And so it's Tormund Giant's Bane, which is what he's called because everyone thinks he killed a giant, but he's like, well, they actually should call me Tormund Giant's babe, which does go into the theories of why people think Tormund might secretly be somebody else. His speech doesn't really mess up here, but it's because Tormund himself tells tales, and so it's like, oh, we have to look at how there's
some inconsistencies in his speech patterns later down the road for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he also tells, sort of another one about like the snow bear, and so he keeps going on and he's telling Jon some of these stories. And so then, he's asking him, he's like, well, why don't you get with Ygritte? It doesn't make sense to Tormund.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that gets changed. Ygritte pulls a fast one on him at
she
the end.
Sure does. She
sure does. So Jon is also spending most of his days in Ygritte's company and nights as well. Mance Rayder had not been blind to Rattleshirt's mistrust of the crow come over. So after he had given Jon his new sheepskin cloak and suggested he might want to ride with Tormund instead, Jon agreed. And the very next day, Ygritte and Longspear Rick left Rattleshirt's band for Tormund's as well. So like Ygritte she wants to be by Jon. Every night when they made camp, Ygritte threw down her sleeping skins beside his, no matter if he was near the fire or well away from it. Once he woke to find her nestled against him, her arm across his chest, listening to her breathe for a long time, trying to ignore the tension in his groin. Rangers often shared skins for warmth, but warmth was not all Ygritte wanted, he suspected. After that, he had taken to using ghosts to keep her away. Old Nan used to tell stories about knights and their ladies who would sleep in a single bed with a blade between them for honor's sake, but he thought this must be the first time where a dire wolf took the place of a sword.
Dang. Dire wolf's better than a sword in this instance, possibly.
I guess. There's some tension.
There's a little bit of tension, and his body's betraying him. I mean, Jon Snow is in a very messy situation, and it's funny that he's just like accidentally fallen into, like you were talking about, like the customs. Like now he's starting to be a part of the wildling customs, and how far do you need to go to actually keep your word to Corn Halfhand, aka Arthur Dane? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it's funny. I will say that this one's funny. Sam's might be funnier with Gilly, because Sam's like, you know, he's like really taking it back. He doesn't, you know, he
He's
doesn't
like
know what
Sir
to do.
Ezra, circa 2008 at the bar, Long Island Eds.
But uh but John's here is pretty good too, because he's still kind of like, oh, I don't know, what do I do, you know? But it doesn't it is it only, I'm trying to remember if it's in the books, but I know in the show Sam says, he's like, well, technically it doesn't say we can't lay with a woman, it just says we can't father any children.
Hey, listen, you know, a young man knows.
Tormund brings that up too.
Hey,
He's like, well, just go drink some moon tea.
there's some semantics
They're
behind all this.
they're pretty progressive up there.
You know, young crows know the rules. Old crows know how to work around them.
To break the rules.
That's right.
Okay, so then John starts to look at her, and you know, at first he kind of thinks, you know, she's ugly, but then he's like, well, I don't know, maybe let me kind of look at her a little differently here, right? Says, you know, when she's sitting by the fire and her hair is not as crooked as I thought, or tangly as I thought, and yeah, he's getting the feels.
Yeah, you know, that familiar feeling around somebody, you know, and it just you know, you're up in the north, you're looking at Tormund and mammoths that smell bad.
Yeah, I know. I have seen some things. I'm looking. Been looking. I always go back and look at like the reread Reddit to see what some people are saying about some of this, and it's brought up a few times here that, of course, you know, the way the wildlings call it is Gret is lucky because of her hair. So a lot of people think she's beautiful because red hair was rare among the free folk, and those who had it were said to be kissed by fire, which was supposed to be lucky. And I think even later, when Tormund talks about it, he's like, you guys can have kids. He says, a strong son or a lively, laughing girl kissed by fire. Where's the harm in that? And so some people, like, oh, being potentially kissed by fire is lucky. Also, a son or a daughter, you know, a daughter kissed by fire. Well, Jimmy, even though Daenerys' hair is blonde, is she not kissed by fire?
I would say she definitely was kissed by fire when her dragons hatched. Without a doubt. My goodness.
Could that be a thing too? Is John's just got this thing for girls?
What color hair does Val have?
Oh, I think Val's is almost, I think Val has blonde hair, but it might be one of those things where they describe it as looking white because they're north,
okay.
Which like but because a big theory about Val is that she's a Targaryen.
What Targaryen would she be?
Well, because Val is she's Dalla's sister.
Okay.
Yeah, some people think that Val is like, well, some people think that Val could be like Jon Snow's twin.
Some people think
well, look, let me tell you.
Oh no.
The other day, here we go. Hold on. And it's only because I was watching Game of Thrones and talking about the ice wall, but just real quick here about the earth being flat.
Jeez.
So TikTok, if you like something on TikTok or something like that, man, my entire algorithm changed. And I came across this channel where people were talking about it, and they think that the Antarctica is like an ice wall, right? Have you seen this?
No,
it is.
No, I haven't.
You should look it up.
I shouldn't.
I don't, because then your whole algorithm's jacked up. But you know, Westeros, the wall might go around the whole thing.
Well, I do love that idea. Which I've been reading Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, and there's a wall of Nessus in it. And George apparently did take some, not all. Hadrian's Wall was his big inspiration. But he also did look at the wall of Nessus, and I think it actually goes all the way around the city, which is really interesting. I mean, Val is one of the most compelling characters with the biggest question marks around her. I have never once thought she was a real Targaryen. Like, never seriously considered that.
Well, I think that everybody thinks everybody is a Targaryen.
Yeah, I mean, that's just out of hand. You know what I mean? That's as silly as saying Dunk killed Sir Arlen. I mean,
Yeah, so let me pull it up here. This is from Reddit, and it's one of those like theories of the year type thing.
Oh my god.
So the big theory on Val potentially being a Targaryen is that because she has the long hair, there's shocking parallels between Val and other Targaryen princesses, and like it's actually one of the like the best Song of Ice and Fire theory like redditors ever, which is Cantus,
Mhm.
who's has like he just that guy just write. I think it's a guy because I think he has like a YouTube page. Basically writes like full blown novels on his theories, and some of them are like his one about the Lost and Shield is like arguably one of the best like single best Game of Thrones theories I've ever read, and his Tourney at Harrenhal theory, which is like it's I don't know, it's like a 32-page theory. It's pretty insane. But
One of the biggest,
he also makes the argument that Val could be a Targaryen. But I think in order to believe that, you'd have to, it goes into the whole Mance Raiders, Rhaegar to the north. I mean, it's a lot of things have to happen, but
it's a fragile theory is what I would call it.
Yes, but some of it, and we could dive into it at some point. Maybe we could do like a Patreon.
We'll do another Val episode. We had a actually Val episode on the YouTube is one of the most popular videos we've done.
It is. It's like our number one YouTube search term is Val.
Yeah.
So
we'll go back to Val. I'm interested. I think there's more compelling things for her to be than a Targaryen. Like, you know what I mean? I think people get zoned in like Skywalkers, and it's just like there's a whole lot of other cool stuff going on.
Right.
Especially
she may not survive. She may not survive Hardhome because remember Hardhome happens differently in the show. Hardhome happens before Jon is killed, and in the books, Hardhome hasn't happened yet. So Hardhome is gonna happen in the upcoming books. So we'll have to see how that plays. Whether everybody makes it out or everybody just gets massacred, we don't know. Because Val is sent right now at the end of A Dance of Dragons. She's going off to Hardhome to try and save everybody.
Yeah.
And there was like an original character in the show who I always forget her name, but she essentially sort of, a lot of people think maybe she was playing that Val role where it's like her and her son, and then she gets turned into, she's like only in like that one episode. I always forget her name, but then she gets turned into a white after she's killed there.
Yeah, so, Val has a pretty big role to play, I think, at least at the Wall in the next book. I don't know if she'll make it all the way through, even through Hardhome. Maybe she won't, but I don't know. I felt like George is going for something a little bit more there, but we'll have to see.
Well, I do think that she is going to be a love interest for Jon, and I think that a lot of it, if you actually look at a lot of language, like especially in this chapter here, it's kind of similar to the way that Jon and Ygritte go, which, and like their relationship too, also kind of leads me to think that I could see the possibility of Jon and Dany not happening if Jon and Val does happen, because is he going to lose 2 wildling wives and then go with Dany? Jon and Dany may not happen in the books. Not like that. Not like they might be like, oh, hey, we're both Targaryens, but it may not be like a love.
I don't think it'll be a love thing. Supposedly Dan and Dave came up with that entire storyline and the ending during season 4, and that was a strictly Dan and Dave thing. So I don't personally think that's going to happen. Also, I think if you try to shoehorn in Val as a love interest and then Dany, it would be way too much.
It's too much in 2 books. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, unless Jon does end and it's sort of like when he goes back to the Wall at the end, like if that does happen, still somehow Jon's like, I'm just gonna go north at the end, then like maybe he could be like, well, I'll just go be with Val, and that's kind of a little thing for him here. But because you look at some of this stuff here too, so like Ygritte saying, you're a free man now, or this is Tormund saying to Jon, trying to convince her, he's like, you're a free man now, and Ygritte is a free woman. What dishonor is it if you lay with her? Well, I might get her with child. I'd hope so. A strong son or lively laughing girl kissed by fire. Where's the harm in that? Words failed him for a minute. The child would be a bastard. And then Tormund, are bastards weaker than other children's, more sickly, more likely to fail? No, you're bastard born yourself. And if Ygritte does not want a child with you, she'll go to some woods witch and drink a cup of moon tea. You do not come into it, once the seed is planted. I will not father a bastard. Tormund shook his shaggy head. What fools you kneelers be. Why did you steal the girl if you don't want her? Steal? I never. You did, said Tormund. You slew the two she was with and carried her off. What do you call it? I took her prisoner. You made her yield to you. Yes, but Tormund, I swear I never touched her. Are you, and then he goes into like some other stuff too, where he's like, are you sure like you're not gay, essentially? What I mean? Like, is what he asked him. But that's what we're talking about, that like the customs, it's totally like Gret might be viewing Jon as like might already be viewing Jon, because this is what they've been led to believe, is like you essentially at some point get taken by a man, like they come and steal you. So she might already be looking at Jon as like, this is my guy. He's already stole me.
Yeah. And beyond that, even looking at this from Jon Snow's, point of view and where he's come from, this is the first time in his life he's being told that being a bastard isn't a bad thing. They don't care. They're like, well, that's silly. If it was done out of love, like who gives two shits, And
they might not even know the word.
That's what I'm saying. It's a complete flip for Jon, and now you can kind of start to see if you're thinking from his point of view, like, hey, they're not so bad. They were actually nice to me. Like, exactly. I don't know. They didn't mind my parentage that I had no control over, and it's just interesting that for Jon, because you can imagine he's probably fighting that inside as he's having this conversation. That's why he says, "I will not father a bastard." And Tormund's like, "Dude, whatever. That's fine. Like, nobody cares." No one cares.
Right. Well, and it's literally look at just how differently they view themselves, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between their wildlings. That's like, in a way, it's a derogatory term. That's it's not
sure.
Well, it could be somewhat racist because they but it's a slanderous term, it's a derogatory term, whereas they're like, we're free folk. I mean, a huge difference.
Massive.
In the connotation of how you,
that's right.
Of how you view it. And we've talked about this before too, with Tyrion, is like they almost view the Moon Clan people with more reverence than they do the wildlings.
Just barely.
But yes, because they still live south of the wall.
Yes, because of course no one that doesn't belong to our nation could be happy.
Right.
They of course are miserable and want to be part of Westeros. And I think that's a big point of contention. It's like, the wildlings are always trying to come south of the wall. They want what we have. And it's like, no, we just don't believe that you should be able to stake claim. Borders aren't real. Get lost, nerds.
Yeah.
Like that.
I would actually probably rather be a wildling than I would in the Moon clans.
Dude, yeah, for sure.
The Moon clans are like they're like Appalachia. I mean, they're like real backwoods. I've already
done that.
I mean, they're like real backwoods in Westeros, as opposed to the wildlings. Almost feel a little more sophisticated.
Yeah, it's like
you know what? I should start calling them the free folk.
The free folk. Let's clean it up.
Let's clean it up a little bit. Okay, we're a pro free folk podcast here. Okay,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
we're not talking about the subreddit. We're just talking about.
Don't go there. Yeah, that's real free over there.
Real free.
Yeah, the free folk. That we got to start calling them that.
Yes, the free folk are not the enemy. By God,
no, they're not. Although Jon does get attacked here in a second. So
he sure does. He gets attacked by a bird.
Yeah, we'll get to there too. But here we go. So I do kind of like here as they keep going, and Jon's thinking, why, talking about. So Jon actually thinks about it too. He says, they have no laws, no honor, not even simple decency. They steal endlessly from each other, breed like bees, prefer rape to marriage, and fill the world with baseborn children. Yet he was growing fond of Tormund Giantsbane, great bag of wind and lies, though he was, long spear as well, and Ygritte. No, I will not think about Ygritte. So his ideas are beginning to become a little challenged here.
As they should, and I would say the traveling is the great humbler in the human experience.
Yeah. So then he's going on just talking about other wildlings as well. There was other folks fiercer than Varamir, from the northernmost reaches and the haunted forest, the hidden valleys of the Frostfangs, even queerer places. The men of the frozen shore, who rode in chariots made of walrus bones, pulled along by packs of savage dogs. And let me pull the map back up here too, because that's like one place we don't ever go to, but we just get to see, people from here. I mean, look at that, like the frozen shores over here in like the Bay of Ice and everything. We never go there, we never travel there, but I mean, that's pretty far out there when you really look at it.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, it's as far west as the Lands of Always Winter. It's just south.
Yeah. And it also just caused you to think, like, I mean, right, it's like, why don't obviously these people can build boats. I mean, they could just like sail right here, just
Well, it
sail
might have
right from there.
icebergs or something in it. Like, it could be just that, or I don't know. Maybe boats get raided by free folk.
Because Skagos on the other side, Skagos isn't, well, it's on this map up here, this little continent way up here, if you can see that. Move my cursor. I mean, obviously they sail there, but it might be a warmer ocean over there.
Yeah, I
but
think that's probably likely.
yeah. So I'm just kind of interesting to kind of see, like, really, because Mance Rayder, remember, he goes around all these different places and unites all these different clans. I mean, that's a lot of traveling, a lot of
Really
totally different cultures that Mance is doing here. So, okay, so continuing on here, this is where Jon starts to think, well, I might have to actually sleep with Ygritte, because Corn told me, ride with them, eat with them, fight with them. The ranger had told him the night before, and watch. But all this watching, he learned little. The half-hand had suspected that the wildlings had gone up into the bleak and barren Frostfangs in search of some weapon, some power, some sorcery with which to break the wall. But if they had found any such, no one was boasting it openly or showing it to Jon, nor had Mance confided any of his plans or strategies. Since that first night, he had hardly seen the man save at a distance. I'll kill him if I must. And then we'll get to that thing here in a bit where Jon is in the he's in the room. He's right there with Mance, and Mance is walking up to him, and he thinks he's going to kill him. We see it in the show as well, but it's done a little differently. And Mance looks at the sword. And he's like, if you even think about it, you're just it's gonna be over for you.
Yeah. And that's a pretty tense moment for Jon, and that probably pushes him a little bit further, thinking, well, maybe I will just do the old hanky-panky with Ygritte and save my life.
Yeah. And here they're also during this whole scene too, Mance is asking Jon about, like, who was here, whose camp was this, all of these things, and Jon ends up telling him, it was the old bear, it was Mormont. And Jon's kind of also thinking too, like, Mormont might I'm hoping that Mormont comes and saves me with this big huge army. Of course, we know that that's not going to happen, but I mean, do you think that they actually could have won? That Mormont could have actually won?
No. There are hundreds of without the wall, the Night's Watch are doomed, which I would argue there's a chance they were going to be doomed anyway, because Mance Rayder is very capable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty huge army.
It is massive.
Do you think if Mance had actually gotten south of the wall,
yeah,
with like an actual army, like a full wildling army, what do you think he would have been like, let's take over? Or do you think he could have just been like, we're safe?
I think he probably would have, pillaged. The free folk would have taken what they wanted up in the north. But do I think that they're going to be like going down to King's Land? No, not at all. I don't think they have any interest in like usurping or any of that. I think they just simply wanted to go where they wanted. And I also don't know if they'd like the warm weather. I don't know how the mammoths would fare down in that climate either. So no, I think they probably would have went up north, and then it would have been up to the Lord Paramount of the North to, Eddard Starks to try to weed them out, and then maybe reinforcements come. I think it would have been a long.
Well, but I'm talking about like right now. So if like right now, Mance actually brings this army. If Mance brings this army south of the wall,
no, he's just trying to get safe. He's not trying to fight a big war with the people.
I kind of feel like maybe they would have went straight to Winterfell, because that's like the biggest holding up there, and Winterfell's in complete disarray right now.
Yeah, I think they probably would have went to Winterfell.
I don't think the Boltons would have. I don't think the Boltons would have any shot at.
No, because remember,
I
forces are
mean, we
still
know,
Storm Swords.
right? We know it's the Boltons that are
Yes.
in the process of taking over right now, but
Yeah, and
currently
we're
it's still
also in a
kind of
Storm of Swords, so all the forces are still south. They're south of Moat Caitlin. So no, I think that they could have taken Winterfell easily. I think they also could have fought off the Ironborn, most likely. Because I mean, we're talking about giants here, hundreds of giants. Crazy.
yeah. And John even thinks too. He's like, the old bear and all of his men, they would be mounted. They would just come and he would just decimate them. And they sort of think it would be difficult for them to attack him because he would be able to, bear in.
The Jorah Mormont thought that the Dothraki, what would they be able to do against my armor? And the Dothraki's like, no, you're slow, bro. Like, you're so slow. Now, does armor make a difference? Of course it does, or people wouldn't wear it. But I don't know. I think Jon is underselling the wildlings' capability in the martial arts.
It's kind of their territory too. I mean, I know the Night's Watch is up there, but it's totally different. It's totally different of being at the wall and like being even over at the Fist of the First Man. I'll pull the map back up again. I mean, look how far away you are from the wall. And I don't know how accurate this legend is up here, talking about, it might be like 600 kilometers or I don't know, but I don't even know what that is. I don't know how many what a kilometer is. We're Americans, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what 1,000 miles, kilo, mile,
I'm not even
I don't know.
Attempt. I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut on this one.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I don't know that he would have been able to hold him, especially if the giants come. I don't think they're at all equipped. Even if you can like dig trenches and stuff, I don't think that's going to stop giants.
No, not at all.
Yeah, Jon says the old bear will through them like an axe through porridge, and I don't think that would happen at all. So okay, so we continue on a little bit here. We're going into the camp. There's a song that's being sung. In the stony halls, they burn their great fires. In the stone halls, they forgive their sharp spears. Whilst I walk alone in the mountains with no true companion but tears. They hunt me with dogs in the daylight. They hunt me with torches by night. For those men who are small can never stand tall, while giants still walk in the light. Oh, I am the last of the giants, so learn well the words of my song. For when I am gone, the singing will fade, and the silence shall last long and long. And then a great cries, and Jon says, it's only a song. There's hundreds of giants. I've seen them. Hundreds, she said furiously. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Well, the giants are still dying.
Yeah,
they're dying out. So, okay, continuing on here, Jon turned to the sudden sound of wings, blue-gray feathers, and this is where he's attacked by the bird, and Ygritte sort of ends up saving him. But there is a really interesting line I pulled out of here where Jon's talking about, well, he died, but perhaps he warged into that bird and some part of him lingers still.
Yes, this is definitely something that we should be keeping our eyes on. Can a bird hate? Jon had slain the wildling Orell, but some part of the man remained within the eagle. The golden eyes looked out on him with cold malevolence. I'll come, he said. The blood kept running down into his right eye, and his cheek was a blaze of pain. When he touched his black gloves, it came away stained red. Let me catch my Garen. He could be leagues away by now, ripping out the throat of some elk. Perhaps it was just as well. So this is definitely hinting at warging being something that can extend past death, possibly. And then obviously we know with all the context that A Dance with Dragons prologue shows exactly this pretty much. So this is pretty major. I mean, this is stuff that George wrote back, 20 years ago. And I think that this was always planned to go into the story of Jon Snow and his eventual death and resurrection, I think.
Yeah. Now, remember, it's kind of interesting to think about where George is at in this writing process, because here he is in A Storm of Swords. And he may not have thought it was going to be 7 books at this point, because his original plan was 3. it's hard, it's hard to say. And then he sort of thought everything that was he thought A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons was going to be one book, right? So maybe he was at this point, he's maybe thinking at this point, the end of my next book, A Feast for Crows, will be Jon's death. So, I'm wanting to put this in here to set up, that moment later in the end of my next book, because we're still early. We're only in chapter 15 of A Storm of Swords.
Yeah, and it's just impressive to think that he was planning this far out. Now, we do know at this point, since Storm of Swords, he knew it was going to be more than 3 books. I think he was thinking 5 at this point, because this is when the time skip is still planned. So it was supposed to have that 5-year gap, and then books 4 and 5 would basically wrap up the series. You would have 5 years in between. Obviously, that didn't end up happening, which I think is actually a good thing. But here we are. So I think he was definitely thinking about Jon's resurrection at this point, and was probably thinking, how can we expand on this warg stuff? Because we have Bran, Arya has a little bit of this, and then obviously there's Jon and Ghost, but he really wanted to set in stone that there's more to this. And also, we see these things from a fairy tale aspect a lot of the times, right? People are saying, oh, there's a myth of warging, and Robb Stark turns into a wolf and rips out Lannister throats. And we're like, oh, that didn't actually happen. Like, we know that didn't happen. But George is saying, well, there might be some myths around it, but let me show you something real. And this is definitely that big hint.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So basically it kind of just ends here with, we've already talked about it a little bit, which is where Jon is in and he's going to try and kill Mance. And then Ygritte ends up ultimately saving him, asking about like where he's sleeping and everything. And, Ygritte says, well, he's going to be sleeping with me tonight, essentially. Right. She says, we've been sleeping together. And then Jon just sort of, she ends up getting him out of it. And then some of the last lines here, sure you are that, are you? Ygritte laughed. Atop the stones, the ring wall ghost hunched with the white furs bristling. He made no sounds, but the dark red eyes spoke blood. The Lord of Bones moved his hand slowly away from his sword, backed off a step, and left them with a curse. Ghost padded beside their garrons as Jon and Ygritte descended the fist. It was not until they were halfway across the milk water that Jon felt safe enough to say, I never asked you to lie for me. I never did, she said. I left out part is all. You said that we've beneath your cloak many a night. I never said when we started, though. The smile she gave was almost shy. Find another place for Ghost to sleep tonight, Jon Snow. It's like Mance said, deeds are truer than words.
Yeah. Also, just like the line where I think I can't remember exactly who, but it's like his heart might still have black in it, and Mance just says, cut it out. Like, cut it out of his chest. Like, oh my goodness. Like, Mance isn't messing around. He's here to win. He's not playing games. Yeah.
I'll see if I can find that. He says, and then Jon also keeps calling Mance your grace. He's like, I'm not your grace. I mean, he's really like checking him to be like, I'm not your lord. This is not what we're here for. We're here for business.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was easy to lose your, and then he's also saying too, Jon, I like this line here. It was easy to lose your way beyond the wall. Jon did not know that he could tell honor from shame anymore, or right from wrong. Father, forgive me. Is what he's thinking.
And he is in a tough situation. Like, we make light of the Ygritte stuff, but like this is a 16-year-old kid that's getting, or maybe he's 15 at this point, getting pulled in every direction possible while having to slay someone he thought that was like a legend. I mean, it's really crazy to think about Jon's arc.
Well, what do you think too about here is that Jon is thinking of Ned here and thinking about Jon did not know that he could tell honor from shame anymore, or right from wrong. And he's saying, Father, forgive me, when he's about to lie. So what he says is a lie, and he's thinking to his dad, like, I'm always trying to do the right thing, even though Jon's like whole parentage is based off of a lie.
It also just shows the fact that, Ned Stark was lying, right? And Ned Stark lied to him. So, and he did it because it was the right thing to do. So Jon is being more Eddard-like than he even knows. And my God, is the shadow of Ned Stark not massive over everyone?
Oh, it continues throughout the whole series. But yeah, great. Excellent line there by George.
Yes.
So okay, I'm gonna pull up just some of the reread Reddit because I love to just pull this up. And this was back in 2012. Was this when they were reading this one here? So Tormund is the only one that can make bestiality sound cool. You know, in the South, must a man wed every girl he beds? You know, like just some funny things here. So I already pulled up the one, a strong son by for Kissed by Fire. Where's the harm in that? You know, it goes. They compare it to some C.S. Lewis quote from The Silver Chair, which is the Chronicles of Narnia, saying there's like a similar vibe there. Giants were outsized men who lived in colossal castles, fought with huge swords, and walked around in boots a boy could hide in. Just to reread the children's adventure in the Giant's Castle makes a great excuse to reread that classic book. Just because I guess there's some similar things in there as well. Let me see what some other people are saying here. So could he have meant the wildlings and the northerners were both the north and they must rally together against the others? When they talk about like the north. Yeah. Because that could be Mance's plan, is to get south of the wall and hope that the wall is just going to save them. Because that is, I mean, obviously that's what he's trying to do.
Saying, and they're seeing the real threat, right? Like we're still speculating, but they've been up there. They know what's coming. The Thins are, flying down south, which I don't think they would have been welcomed under normal circumstances.
No.
It's a Mayday, emergency time. I mean, honestly, we could take a look at something like climate change and look at places like we're talking about the future over here, but there are places already that are in, you can't live there anymore because of the flooding. So it's one of those things where they're actually they're the first affected by this disaster, essentially.
Yeah, this is a good quote here too. This person brings up this saying, something that troubles me has always been that Ned had an inkling that these matters were happening. Remember, if you go all the way back to like a Game of Thrones, like the first few chapters, Mance Rayder is mentioned like 5 times in the first like handful of chapter. So like every chapter, Mance Rayder's mentioned. So Catelyn 1 of a Game of Thrones. He was the 4th this year, like a deserter from the Night's Watch. The poor man was half mad. Something had put fear into him so deep my words could not reach him, he sighed. Benjen writes that the strength of the Night's Watch is down below 1,000. It's not only desertions, they are losing men on ranging as well. Is it the wildlings? She asked. That's Catelyn. Who else? Ned lifted ice, looked down at the cold steel length of it, and it will only grow worse. These days, the day may come when I have no choice but to call the banners and ride north to deal with this king beyond the wall for good and all.
Dang. I mean, he definitely had a feeling the thing
they're thinking that. Yeah. So, I mean, Ned is thinking it's the wildlings that are growing out of control up there. Mm-hmm. And he may have to just take Winterfell north of the wall and say, all right, we're going to put an end to this. But, it's kind of crazy to like what would have happened. Ned probably would have argued to do the same thing that Jon did.
I would like to think that Ned has that kind of foresight to see what the bigger threat would have been. But it is interesting at this point, where they think the threat above the wall is the wildling, and that the wildlings is this big issue, when in reality it's far worse than that.
Yeah, because if Ned had gone up after Benjen had gone missing and perhaps seen some of this stuff, I think Ned too would have argued with Robert, hey, we need to let the wildlings south of the wall because there's a bigger threat up there.
And if Mance
and they would have all the Southerners would have laughed it off. They would have just been like,
to say, if there's anyone that's going to get along with Mance Rayder, it's going to be the people from Winterfell and north of the wall, or north of Mo Catelyn, the Neck,
right
down there with Walder Frey and company. So I don't necessarily know if they love the Starks, but I think they probably have a little bit more respect for them than people like the Lannisters, for instance.
Well, I think Mance has some respect for Ned too, because he's snuck in.
It definitely seems like it. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Nope. Okay. That's mostly it. So. Woo! That's a good one. That's a
good
fun
episode. Good chapter too.
That's a fun chapter. Next time we're into Sansa. And yeah, she's doing stuff with Marjorie. So we'll get into that. I was wondering if there's anything just immediately that sort of connected me. But I will say, even though it's been a bit since we hit the last chapter, the Catelyn chapter, a lot of the stuff in that Catelyn chapter last time was like, you need to keep your wolves close, which kind of also ties into this. And then Rob keeps reminding her of Jon's wolf.
And Jon said that Ghost is way away in this chapter.
Yep. Yeah. So there are themes chapter to chapter that you have to try and keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, guys, with that, we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, Sansa 2.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We'll see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.